Once again, welcome to the premises of the Institute of European Studies. Speaking about I'd like to add a personal note. I met Rabi this summer on a seminar that took place in Mohrid Lake in what is now known as Northern Macedonia. I listened to Rabi's lecture, which was dedicated to de-radicalization of the minors who have been exposed to the radical ideology of either ISIS, Nusra, or other similar terrorist organizations, and what should be done with people that have been exposed and let's say psychologically damaged by these radical views and sometimes even deeds that they were forced to conduct. So this is very interesting for me, and I have suggested to colleagues from ISIL that we should hear some more, let's say, stories and experiences that Rabi can provide us with. So, without further ado, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I would like also to thank the Institute of European Studies for giving me this chance and for inviting me to this beautiful city. It's really a good chance to transmit, or let's say transfer, part of the experience that we accumulated in the Middle East regarding those subjects. And since I'm currently living in the Balkans, in Southeastern Europe, I think it's a good idea also to learn from our mistakes that we did in the Middle East in order to avoid doing the same thing that we did. So I will immediately start to talk about the subject. So we are talking about the implications of the Afghanistan crisis on European security, and mainly on Taliban versus ISIS. Many people are confused between ISIS, Daesh, Qaeda. They have many names, many groups. So we will dive in that. So I would like to read just part of a paragraph that I wrote. So the collapse of the Afghani government and the Taliban takeover of the entire country have caused concern everywhere in the world, especially in the European Union. Chaos and instability swept Afghanistan and may very easily spread to Europe and start a new refugee crisis. The last refugee crisis that we had in Europe was in 2015, following the Syrian conflict. Countries in the European Union were, if we look at it from the immigrants' point of view, we see that we have an influx which trying to reach Europe through the Balkan route, going from Turkey, Greece, Macedonia, Serbia to the European Union. Prior to that, we have the African route, which goes through the Mediterranean directly to Italy and going to Europe. So those were the main two routes of the immigrants. European countries didn't have, let's say, they were not ready for such an influx of refugees. So every country started to handle the crisis as they saw it's suitable. However, the smartest one that handled this, it was Germany, and because of bad coordination between countries of the European Union, we can see today that many of those immigrants, they reached Germany. Germany took through their integration program. That's why we will talk later about the integration program, and generally about the DDRR programs, which are meant specifically to avoid such consequences that we have in the other countries in Europe. So they got, in fact, the skills that they were missing in Germany, and now they're calling to distribute, to get the quotas to the different European countries. So they got, let's say, what they need, and but they are the only country who has a working mechanism for the integration of the immigrants. Anyway, concerning Afghanistan, the EU fears that Al-Qaeda and other extremist Islamist groups will once again find a safe haven there. Therefore, most of the EU leaders started to stress that combating terrorism and preventing the use of the Afghan territory by international terrorist groups remains at the core of the EU collective engagement in Afghanistan. The collapse of the Afghanistan government, it was, we saw it all and we were surprised on the TV that, look what happened. The Taliban took Afghanistan in 9 days. However, all this started back when the US started those talks, I think, on the 29th of February 2020, about the withdrawal of the US troops from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, there were a lot of negotiations happening in Qatar, where there is a representation of the Taliban there. And, here if we comment, if we look at it from let's say, from the audience, as an audience, and looking at that, you can see that the US is repeating the same mistake that it did in Vietnam back then. And the whole thing about the agreement, I see it as a tool, that's my personal opinion, I see it as a tool to justify a chic withdrawal from Afghanistan. So they were waiting for such a moment to, in an elegant way to withdraw and not to emphasize their failure in Afghanistan. So the US has spent around $88 billion on building a 300,000 regular army, all active personnel, not reserve. And in 9 days, they surrendered not the city, but the entire country, the 34 governors in Afghanistan, to the Taliban. So this started back then. Taliban, back before the 90s, during the 90s, Taliban, they lack the tactics. They lack, let's say, the experience, the tactical experience, the strategic experience. They lack the strategy. And it was like a group of tribe. They wanted just to make some change, to do something. And they made their first mistake by seizing, by attacking Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. That was the first mistake back then. The second thing, they had an approach, it was a very repressive approach. Anyone who was against them, they dealt with him in a very specific way, very aggressive way, and that created, back then, problems with the northern part of Afghanistan, the southern part, the opposition groups, and there were lack of coordination, and they made, let's say, several mistakes. And that's why they lost it again in 2001, and the US freed Afghanistan from the Taliban. And from 2001, for 2 decades, the US is trying to build a regular army that can protect, preserve the peace, the sovereignty of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the European Union, I think, I will give the exact number, with billions of dollars they were because there maybe the new plan, it was 1.2 billion euros to spend on Afghanistan for rule of law, prosperity, economic reforms, and all those things. However, the Taliban, they learned from their mistakes and they started a complete different approach. So, the first thing, they left Kabul, the capital city, as the last step to seize the entire country. They started talks. First, they started to talk about the people who have sympathy with them, to negotiate with them, to discuss what are the exit strategies, the way out. We have an invasion from the US, we need to fight against this invasion. So they start to talk with those groups. There are a lot of groups in Afghanistan. It's not just 2 or 3, there are a lot of groups, and every region has its groups, has its own, gathered all under the same religion, but they have their habits, they have their a tribe, when there is the chief of the tribe that you need separately to negotiate with him. So they started to go to those talks, to agree with them, to make a specific tactic. And in fact, it's not true that the Taliban, with 60,000 personnel or members, they took the entire country. It's not true. I think the number is around 200,000. Because meanwhile, they were going and discussing this very frankly with them. They were telling them, we are going to come back to govern, to rule the country. So that's your option. So either you are with us. So, so they started to discuss that, to negotiate that, and many people, they agreed with them. Okay, we will withdraw, we will be with you, and we will join you to the fight. And that's why with all those 300,000, all the sophisticated arms, missiles, everything, they simply, the ones that they agree with Taliban, they surrender. The ones that they did not, that they literally, they ran away, and they left behind everything, all the ammunition, all the equipment, and they simply ran away. Those are the ones that we saw that they wanted to leave Afghanistan. Why this happened? It happens because in, let's say, in defense science, they do not have the doctrine, the army there. It's not like other regular army, in spite of the US president when he came on TV and he said that they have 300,000 personnel well equipped, and then like other countries in the world. No, excuse me. In fact, the army, it was a corrupted institution in Afghanistan. The generals, they were seeking their personal, let's say, benefit. They sit behind the desk, they start to implement their own agendas through the army. And what happens is that they did not develop the doctrine that it should be, or we have it in other regular armies in the world. And that's why once they saw the danger, they just withdraw, surrender, and they gave up. As well, other groups, they joined Taliban, and the two things that was different than their approach back then, it was the proper, let's say, marketing or the PR that they did right before seizing Afghanistan. When they started different visits, and I mentioned that in one article I wrote it like 6 months ago, they started to visit China, to visit Russia, they even visited Iran. Iran, they had this always tension between them, and then they went and they visited them and they talked to them. So they prepared, let's say, the field, and from a PR point of view, they changed their rhetorics about women, about rule of law. They said even we will have an independent, they will have justice reforms, they will have independent courts, they will not do like they used to do long time ago to cut people's hands, and arms, etc. They said even we will allow women to leave the house, just under one condition, to be covered. And in fact, many European countries started to buy their narrative. So they did not take it in 9 days with 60,000, they took it in maybe 7-8 months negotiation with more of like 200,000 personnel. We are looking at, when this started to happen, the Afghanistan president, he came and he said, yeah, there is no need to worry, we'll make a very peaceful transition of power, we'll make a government of how we call it?
National unity.
Government of national unity. However, the next day he flees Afghanistan on the airplane, as well the American ambassador. They just kept around 650 US personnel there to protect the airport. But then the next day, the American president said, okay, we're going to send 1,000, and then we're going to send 6,000, and they are going to reach 20,000 US troops again in Afghanistan. However, we are looking at different scenarios. Just want to mention that one of them is that Afghanistan becomes like a ground or a battlefield between the different groups fighting for power there. That's one option. The second option is to become an international, let's say, field of battlefield, because right there you have Russia, you have China, you have Pakistan, you have Iran, and you have India, which is not a very, let's say, smart place to, between such powers, it's a bit awkward. And the third scenario, which we believe that will happen, it will become a safe haven for all the groups that we suspect they do have terrorist activities, regardless of ISIS-K, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and it will become a safe haven. And here I want to go back to a theory that we developed back then when there was the Arab Spring in the Middle East. But we do believe that the Arab Spring was a plan to somehow legitimize and give, legitimize some extreme or some radical groups to come in power. But when this project failed, Afghanistan, it's a plan B, because the US usually, they do not lose that easily. And when the US loses, I think they lose on purpose in order to lose here and to gain something else. And the narrative, it will be that, yeah, all terrorist groups might be in one country, they will find safe haven there, and we will embrace them. We will find a way to deal with them. And actually, here what it scares me, because it can be, again, the plan B of the Middle East, to put them all in one country where they will inspire everyone in the world, especially how Taliban took the government. It will inspire not only terrorist attacks or crime everywhere in the world, not only in Europe, but also it can inspire separatism movements around the world. Because if you can see that Taliban took like the narrative that we are looking at, like in 9 days against 300,000 personnel. So what could happen in Spain, for instance? What can happen in the Middle East, between Gaza and Israel, or between the West Bank and Israel? What can happen? We have such examples everywhere. So that's one question that I ask. So maybe that's about the first scenario. So I will go back to talk about the different radical groups that we have there. Without a doubt, it has become clear that the repercussions of the rapid and unorganized US withdrawal will have many repercussions on the Middle East, Asia, Africa, Europe. It's a new turning point that changes the regional and international balance of power. Whatever the results, Afghanistan will remain a hub of extremism and terrorism. When we talk about the Taliban movement, now the question comes up: who will lead Afghanistan for the next 10 years? So, without going into details, we have the Haqqani movement, we have the Mullah Yaqub, we have the Mullah Abdul Ghani, we have the Mullah Haybatullah. However, from an ideological aspect, the reality of the Taliban in general is the traditional conservative Islamic society. However, when you try to approach that ideology, you encounter the Sharia, the first thing that pops up into your mind. The movement is spontaneous. It's was not organized, now it's organized behind religious slogans. And the Taliban does not have a written list to organize its affairs and relation, nor does it have a membership system, nor an organized relationship. The foundation of their ideological vision includes, and the first and most important of those are to establish the Islamic government on the path of the right-guided caliphate. Islam to be the religion of the people and the religion of the government. The state's law is derived from the Islamic law, and choosing the scholars or leaders, it's more important than choosing, let's say, professionals or educated ones. On the opposite, ISIS, they tend more to believe in bring science, to educate their personnel. And that would be, I would say, it can be an area where we can expect a conflict between both of them. Yeah. So when we speak about Taliban and ISIS, the Taliban call themselves the Islamic Emirate. It does not describe itself as an Islamic State. It does not have it has a commander of the faithful. That's how they call it. The similarities and differences between the ISIS, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, we can summarize them in the following points. I put them in points in order to be simple for people. So, for the Islamic faith, both of the Taliban and ISIS, they have somehow an extremist literature. In terms of leadership, ISIS is headed by a number of Muslim scholars. The ISIS rank is made up of many educated young men. The leadership includes many former officers of Saddam Hussein from Iraq, from the Ba'ath Party. On the other hand, the Taliban leadership consists mainly of uneducated tribal leaders or Shaykh version of the Islam. Schools and education, the Taliban were fiercely hostile to education during their rule. So they have forbidden the education system, they have forbidden going to school, to join such schools to study the Quran, while ISIS did not oppose that. They just abolished, they just chosen some, like the music, like drawings, and they eliminated from the education, however, they do believe in education. The area of operation, the geographical area of ISIS, we know that it's Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. It gathers fighters from all over the world except from the Middle East. And Taliban is taking care of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the tribal areas around. Finances, and that's when it becomes interesting. Finances. Taliban's main source of funding is drug production, as we know, drug trafficking, while ISIS funding comes from slavery business, illegal sale of petroleum products, as well, human trafficking, you name it. In terms of opinion, there is a major agenda to establish the rule of the caliphate through the Islamic world. The group believes in every armed movement to achieve this dream. The Taliban are taking a hardline approach, as they do not consider women to be human beings. Anyway, in most of world civilization, women are kept under tents. That's a fact, and now they change their narrative, so we will see in the upcoming period, will they deliver what they promised or not. The ISIS has a major agenda, I said, to establish. The group believes in the eye of its followers, they do believe that it has to be led by one person, and they want to establish it beyond the territories that they do have. So their dream is to have this vast, big Islamic State, while in Afghanistan they are not interested in that. They are interested in wherever geographical area they are ruling. They want to Sharia to be spread or to be applied. Now we will the conflict between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which is worthy also to mention. The relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda is very close, although they do promise that they will cut the ties with Al-Qaeda, etc. I see this from a security point of view. It's the same we compare it to terrorism and organized crimes. Organized crimes and terrorism are related because they are operating in the same way, and they have a symbiosis between them. Usually, terrorist groups, they take care of the logistics of organized crime. So they use terrorists to protect their activities, to protect their whatever dealing with drugs or whatever, while organized crime groups, they do facilitate for the terrorist movements by issuing them false passports, by a lot of means, also financing them. So if we apply the same rule on Taliban and Al-Qaeda, with the disagreements that they do have with ISIS, we can see that they have a similar relationship, where Al-Qaeda can be, let's say, the longer arm of Taliban outside the territory. Since we all learned in the past 10 years how ISIS are mainly attacking Muslim countries, only Muslims they are attacking. There are a few incidents where non-Muslims were attacked, but mainly that's their focus, because they do believe that when you clean something, you should clean it from within first, and then you spread outside. On the opposite, Al-Qaeda was mainly targeting Western targets. So here we can see that the Taliban may use the capabilities of Al-Qaeda to achieve pressure, to achieve assassinations, operations outside the territories, where mutually they will exchange, they will give them a safe haven, especially in some areas in Afghanistan, where even if the entire world unite to fight against them, they cannot win because of the geographical nature of the area where they are situated. Mainly, I'm talking about Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, which make it even hard for the US, for any power just to go in to fight there. Afghan officials, they have previously asserted that the terrorist group at the same time enjoys a comfortable haven in Taliban-controlled areas. An Afghan official noted that Al-Qaeda was 18 months away from the possibility of launching attacks in the West and carrying out regional attacks from Afghanistan by the end of this year. The senior official, the same one, he said that messages were found on his personal computer showing that Al-Qaeda members, they might soon return to their status prior to 9/11, which is a bit scary, especially in Europe. Why? In the past 5 years, while we saw after the crisis in Syria, and then suddenly the fighters, they appeared in Libya. They disappeared from Syria, they came to Libya. Many of them are coming from our region. Others are coming from Belgium. However, they started to disappear from Libya and to appear again in Afghanistan. And we wrote about that 3 months ago, that the only way for them to reach, it was through the airport. Except through the airport, they cannot reach there. And when we go back and see who was controlling the airport, then we can tell who is responsible for smuggling ISIS fighters from Africa to Afghanistan. Meanwhile, there was a massive indoctrination of ISIS in Africa. That 5 years ago, there is a graph, I will try to find it to show it now search for it. It's very interesting, it shows the increase of numbers of people belonging to ISIS in Africa, how it was 5 years ago and how it is now. And the African route for immigration to Europe did not stop. Just now, they're still coming, but they're coming with a different indoctrination, with a different mentality than the one that was prior to the Syrian crisis. So I think we are in a situation which is a little bit very sensitive, because right now in the European Union they are even studying the creation of legal channels to legalize the immigrants reaching Europe. So they started to think about legal instruments in their own laws to allow the Afghan refugees to come and to settle in Europe. Why? I do not know. There are different theories, because when we talk about the European Union, we talk about one entity, but we do have information from different countries, from Italy, from Germany, from France. France, for instance, insisted on women's rights and human rights, etc. And they even put 5 conditions for them to recognize the movement. It's say that France stated that 5 preconditions to the international community to recognize the movement, the old, new regime, we call it, mainly respecting women's rights and obstructing the exit of Afghan refugees, preventing the return of terrorism, facilitating humanitarian aid access to Afghanistan, as well as forming the transitional government that their country does not become a safe haven again for terrorism and extremist groups. French Foreign Minister explained that those above were the conditions of obtaining international recognition. He warned the Taliban, if they want to meet those demands, if they do not meet those demands, then they will be isolated again from the international community and they will live in ghetto for this time for a longer time. We see the view of Germany is using the same approach like they did. They want to be the first filter to probably get the manpower that they do lack in Germany. And then they suggest again the quotas for the other European countries. When every country is taking quota for them, which the same thing I do not understand. You know, I mean, if I were Germany, I'd say, yeah, that's for the national security for Germany. However, what about the other European countries? I always ask, why do they let Germany do this and nobody's thinking how to manage that? And the lack, and why they cannot manage it? Again, because they do have outdated programs for integration of foreigners. And those programs were designed back then for the economic immigrants. You know, Germany, it was the first country in the 50s where they had the Turkish migrants when they came there. And still Europe is using outdated programs that they are not meant specifically for that type of refugees. And I do not see any effort to modernize it or to, although we suggested as organization, we have sent a few suggestions for the creation or development of a new program that focuses on other aspects, but still the thing that, no, they know better, so they will handle it. There was the European sanctions, we all heard of it. Aspects of cooperation that was before Taliban takes over Afghanistan, we can go through them later. However, one last thing before we go through that, I want to talk about the ISIS-K, which is also something new. Well, although I do expect that, it's my personal opinion, I think that Afghanistan is meant to you know, the third scenario to be safe haven for terrorist groups. Taliban will never change its rhetoric and its narrative to be for the rest of the world that they come because we all saw how they took back Afghanistan. So we can see that they learn from their mistakes. They have now PR, they have marketing, they do believe in some new things. However, they will keep their dealings with Al-Qaeda and with ISIS to achieve their targets which are beyond Afghanistan. However, the ISIS-K is very, I'm not expecting that the ISIS-K will have, let's say, very safe or very stable relation with Taliban. As a province of the core Islamic State, this group aims to take control of Central Asia and South Asia under the Khorasan province banner of the self-declared caliphate. A map published by them shows that the Khorasan area is stretching from Kazakhstan in the north to Sri Lanka, to the Maldives in the south, and from eastern Iran in the west to the western China in the east, which is a big part. Following Kabul International Airport bombing, it killed 13 US service members, more than 170 Afghans, left even more wounded. International attention has turned to the perpetrators, the ISIS Khorasan province, ISIS-K, which has been active in Afghanistan since November 2014, which is famous by its brutality across the province and claiming responsibility for numerous attacks across Afghanistan that have killed many civilians. The ISIS-K was officially accepted by the core of ISIS in 2015. In the years since, has claimed responsibility for a lot of terrorism attacks, including the March 2020 attack during the event that commemorated the life of someone from the Hazara leader, who was killed by Taliban militias in '95. The attack killed 32 people and injured more than 80 others. The Hazara, it's something, it's a completely different group of Shia, which are not Sunni Muslims. Before we know that we have this thing between the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims. However, Taliban is changing its narrative towards the Shia, while ISIS-K is still having the same one. So the group is a sworn enemy to the Taliban, that's a fact. And though it has never captured any Afghan territory, the group may attempt to topple the self-imposed Taliban regime. When we look at Europe, we see in Europe we had the right was holding power in most of the European countries, and then for a period, and then the left came. And then now we have the danger, or we have the threat, danger, we have an issue in Europe. We have the ultra-right, the far right. But why we have the far right? Because people were disappointed from the performance of the right. So then they tend to go to the far right. So if you think the same with in Asia, Afghanistan, in the Middle East, we see that they wanted, and let's say, I don't want to say they wanted an extremist group to rule, but when they were looking at ISIS as a serious power or a serious religious group to rule, but then they got disappointed. But now they got the ISIS-K, which is more radical. So I think many people in the ISIS-K will get the support of many people, especially if the EU and the West do not work on educational programs, raising awareness, etc., at least to delay that. I don't say to stop it, because you cannot stop it. You can just delay it until you build your defense, so at least you can hold them for longer. However, under the Taliban rule, Afghanistan will definitely become a breeding ground for Islamist terrorism in heaven, from which attacks can be launched against Western targets. Latest attacks show that Afghanistan, after the US withdrawal, will be a permissive environment for all sorts of terrorist groups. Security vacuums that are going to develop under the Taliban control will create opportunities for ISIS-K to thrive in Afghanistan. So I think, again, it's just an opinion, that ISIS-K will gain more and more popularity, same like the ISIS when they gained them in 2015 back then. So I will go to talk about an evaluation, like main points to conclude. So the Afghan migrants are expected to knock on the EU doors due to the failing security situation in the country. The European Commission announced that they will develop new legal instruments to allow them to come to regroup in Europe, which this also is the lack okay, if you develop a legal instrument to legalize and enter in Europe, okay, what about the integration program? Because the integration program, it's not just let's say the physical aspect, or you have to teach them what is the constitution, what are the laws, what are their homeworks, what are their homework and their obligations toward the country where they are living, to have social cultural courses, whatever. So this needs also to be developed, because you cannot just invent a legal instrument, put them in the country, and then Germany, as it did in 2015, it will, let's say, go on, while other European countries, such as Italy, did not develop such mechanism. I think that you have a serious problem. Now, the return of Al-Qaeda to Afghanistan is happening. European governments are seeing Taliban gaining power. They fear that Kabul is said to become the capital of the terrorist groups in the world. If the European countries start putting pressure on Taliban and imposing sanctions, it's very likely that the Taliban will allow Al-Qaeda to establish a stronger presence in the country again, encouraging its supporters to carry out terrorist attacks on European interests. It's only a matter of time before we see the attacks reaching Europe. So Europe as Europe and not as the European Union. The entire Europe must be prepared for such influx. So what did we do what did Serbia do to prepare for this scenario? That's need to be discussed. When the European Union started to strengthen its relation before Taliban reached government, they had a plan, which I also have to comment the same thing I did in 2015. You can't just get and throw, I don't know, 2 billion euros, and then we think that you can implement, the rule of law, human rights in countries those countries must be built from scratch. And the approach that they were using, it is a top-down approach, which we think in the Middle East that it is wrong. It has to be bottom-up approach. We need to fix first, the society before just imposing a new leader or imposing a country on them. We said that the cooperation with any future Afghan government will be conditional on comprehensive and peaceful settlement and respect of fundamental rights of all Afghans, including women, youth, minorities, etc. We mentioned that the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan could raise the morale of various extremist groups in the region, and should be expected that not only ISIS but also Qaeda and other small extremist groups in Afghanistan and Pakistan will become stronger, will grow. And we mentioned that ISIS tends to establish the caliphate outside those borders, while Taliban, they are concerned only about their territory. The Taliban seizure of power in Afghanistan raises great concerns among its neighbors that think also that we should tackle, we should talk about. Because the European Union, or let's say European countries, started to say, hey, why don't we make detention centers in neighboring countries? So exactly 5 years ago, when we had the crisis following the Syrian, when we had the refugee crisis following the Syrian war, I asked in one lecture a question, and I said, okay, how many refugees from Syria are in Saudi Arabia? 0. In Bahrain, 0. In Kuwait, 0. In Qatar, 0. And okay, not 0, maybe we have 5, 10, maybe there are 50, which is just a metaphoric thing. Well, the burden of the refugee, of the Syrian crisis, it falls on the back of Turkey and Lebanon were the countries that they had most refugees. That's true, and Egypt as well. But however, Egypt, they could absorb them, that they have, however, Lebanon and Turkey, they do not have the tools to support them. So Turkey had a different approach. Lebanon, we can see today what's happening in Lebanon. So it's a total collapse. So again, we ask ourselves the same questions. Why those refugees? Why not even one country in the Middle East open its doors to the refugees who are closer to them? You do not have to go through the third country, because even the law or the legal instrument we are talking about, they send you back to the first safe country where you came. So if you, for example, if you are coming from Afghanistan, you are landed in Serbia, and from Serbia you're going to Norway, so they will check, okay, Serbia was safe, so you go back to Serbia. That's an example. So the same thing, we do not have Arabic countries that they welcomed any refugees, so we can understand here that even the Middle East, the current Middle East, they refuse the ISIS indoctrination, the ISIS ideology. They fought to get rid of them following the Arab Spring, after what happened there. They learned from their mistakes in Egypt and Tunisia, and I don't think, I'm talking about the part of the Northern Africa. While in Gulf states, we saw the threat that they had, overthrowing kingdoms, etc. So Europe is calling to make a detention center in those countries, they do not want to host them. The immigrant himself, they want to come to Europe. So we will see what will happen. So this Taliban success is seen as a form of defense by terrorist groups in the Middle East, and may inspire them to consolidate their power and seek international legitimacy. As for the international level, European one in particular, the external striking power of the Taliban will be forced through Al-Qaeda, that will be so. Once the West start putting pressure on the new regime in Kabul, so they are more likely to get again with Al-Qaeda, and it's only a matter of time before we encounter unpleasant situations in Europe. Thank you. So that's
Thank you very much for this really informative speech and last thing I said. Before opening the floor, I was just wondering if you made a hint, but was not completely explicit about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. In my opinion, the way it looked on TV was as if it was staged very much. Although it looked very chaotic, and that is the message that the whole world got. And of course, this will be, in my opinion, one of those defining moments like the fall of the Berlin Wall or similar historical events. But you had a situation like in the Hunger Games where Taliban would find containers with unpacked M4s and other military equipment and weaponry, which was completely unpacked, which was not abandoned by the Afghan military, but by the Americans themselves. So in a way, it looked to me as if they left the toys and left the whole region to play with what's going to happen in the future, whatever the scenario of those that you mentioned happens. One way or another, the countries that are surrounding Afghanistan have to be interested in what's left after the American occupation, because China has its region of Xinjiang, eastern to Turkestan, and this region is bordering Afghanistan. So of course, besides the infrastructure and all the things they're interested in, rare metals and so on and so forth, they have a serious concern. The same goes for Russia when it comes to Tajikistan, which is an unstable country bordering Afghanistan and so on. So what do you think? I mean, of course, I don't know how explicit you can be about that, but what do you think about the theory that this was staged in order to leave chaos in the heart of the region?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to say, because when I said we look at the TV, and we got in the morning, Taliban took Afghanistan. However, this started, I said, the 29th of February, and then I think that was the agreement in March 2020. And however, the US, if you look at the US history, that was the second loss or failure after Vietnam. And the US, it's not a country that easily can lose, because it's not only a question of interest, it's a question of ego, it's a question of reputation, it's a lot of things. And that's why I do believe that that was on purpose. First, the agreement, it was just to secure, a safe exit, or let's say to create a chic withdrawal, not to look ugly, so they can withdraw. But however, that was on purpose. That's why I said that my personal opinion, it's on purpose, it's done. Because when the US loses someone, they lose on purpose, because they're going to gain something else. And the point exactly that what I wanted to say, that they want to create or to realize, again, the plan A that failed through the Arab Spring, to realize it again, but now through one entity, and that's why it's more dangerous now, one entity, why it has all terrorist groups in the region, where they are nobody, they are being expelled from every country in North Africa, from every country in the Middle East, so they find only safe haven in this place. So imagine like you put all your rotten tomatoes in one basket, what can happen? So yeah, I do agree that that's probably that's the thing. But it was just, I don't use the word stage because it was very poorly staged. It was very poorly staged. Because the American president came on TV and said, I can show you the videos. We have 300,000 active personnel killed. And then we saw what happened. So the Afghans, the Taliban cannot do all that while the US doesn't know anything about it. Because if other countries knew about that last year, so probably the US knew about it.
Okay, I see some hands raised in the room. Also, if someone will tell me if there is a American computer in front of me, if there are any questions from the Zoom, so they can also ask questions. Which is your please.
Thank you very much. First, it's a great pleasure having you here with us within the next 2 days. And it's especially, I want to thank you that you came here at this moment because, as you said, so many questions are being open and raised on which we still do not have at least basic hints, like probably all of us heard for ISIS-K for the first time when this accident bombing happened there. So I'm really glad that you will also have opportunity to speak to the public audience here on television and with one agency, because I also really do think that many of the things that are kind of, swinging around in the last 2 years under the auspices or the cover of Corona or whatever it is, which really made it's all something that we all forget while we are focused on preserving our life and the health systems. Of course, the same is happening in Macedonia, in which you are living. There are some processes that are happening that are in long term perspective really very, very dangerous. And one of those, and I'm really sorry that we maybe didn't mention to people in Europe, Lebanon, that actually the country you are coming from has really been devastated in the last 5 years. First with extreme number of migrants, which is very hard to sustain and to survive. And on the other hand, with this accident, or we still don't know what happened last year when it ruined completely Lebanon. I still have some friends and professors who are really devastated within their perspective of having stability for their country, and not to speak about the whole region here. So I had several of the concrete questions which I think might be interesting for us when we focus on immediate consequences of what might be happening there. First, one info, I wonder if you saw that our, at that time, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ivica Dačić, I think it was 1 or 2 months ago, publicly stated and that Serbia organized in 2019 hidden negotiations between the Taliban and at that time government of in Kabul of Afghanistan, which means that actually, of course, Serbia didn't do it. It was evaluated. Serbia didn't do that on its own purposes and practices. We are very sure that actually our, as you say, foreign Western partners organized, coordinated, so it's also fit completely within your story that negotiations and preparation for this process of transition have been going on for at least 3 years back. That's one info. Another one, I would like you to explain us how did people from Afghanistan came to Belarus recently and opened. I think that is the first, let me say, international accident or immediate consequence. Of course, there was not a long, huge number of people, but you saw that immediate response, direct diplomatic and even, I would say, security threats between Belarus on one hand and Poland and Lithuania. So I would like to hear from you how it happened that those people went there and how big number of them is. And generally speaking about numbers of people, that's the first concern people have. How many people can we really expect within 1 year maybe to come through the Balkans or through Belarus or whatsoever to Europe as an immediate consequence? And finishing with that, so many all of those issues, just I would like your comment, because you could see in some of the, which is interesting, conservative circles within USA, actually I follow debate, that some of them say, okay, maybe if we fail for the last 20 years there, spend too much money on, without, of course, not bringing democracy, so maybe, at least they hope, this may get some kind of stability, within the sense that actually Taliban here are the only structure that is capable of keeping some kind of control. So, as we all know, we like to hear about stability in the Balkans, which was confirmed with Ms. Merkel's last visit, actually, because she said, okay, just stay as you are, don't make any troubles, give us lithium and we will be happy. Could we have some kind of, let me say, parallel with that as a possible scenario? I know that you are clinging to this third one, that it will probably alright, but what about those arguments saying, okay, let's at least, because I see that in Europe you also have this kind of, Armin Laschet also said something like that, and Scholz, in a sense, well, if they don't make troubles there, or if they accept basic human rights for women, schools for women, okay, we can somehow deal with that and accept that even this kind of very radical regime is acceptable and somebody with whom we could negotiate. Sorry for burdening you with so many issues.
That's great. So, the first thing, when we talk about the negotiations of it's obvious that this has been happening in the past, okay, from my knowledge, the past 2 years, maybe more. However, we heard, many statements about the US, about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Trump was also the president, I'm going to bring back our boys home. So somehow, the first question is somehow related to the fourth inquiry you just asked about. Yeah, they find out finally that maybe with Taliban they can do that. So, yeah, they've been negotiating that long time ago. Many negotiations happened in the Balkan, in Serbia, Macedonia, everywhere, because the two main routes that we have for immigrants are the route of the Mediterranean that comes from Africa to Europe, and the Balkan one that it must go through Macedonia, Serbia, etc. So it is quite normal that any negotiations related to it can be done here also. The reasons we don't know that. Nobody knows. However, we know that years back they are discussing that. I said it has two components or two aspects. One aspect is to make it look chic for the Americans not to look ugly in front of the wall. And the second one is this thing they are losing on purpose. They have an X purpose there. Whatever they was using, they was extracting, they was doing. Then they decided to leave there, but they want to achieve something else, like to hit two birds with one stone. So, realizing that the Taliban are the best ones to rule Afghanistan, we spoke about that even before starting the event today. Somehow, and I mentioned again, you can't just with money, come and impose or the rule of law. And then you expect the country like Afghanistan to suddenly become a normal country. Unfortunately, there are governments, or there is a type or a style to govern that this area of the world on our planet is used to is completely different. And what we always face especially with the European Union as entity, not the European countries, because until today France is France, and France, even I think once they withdrew from the NATO back then when it came in conflict with, I just wanted to say that they are still, keeping their national interest as a priority. However, the European Union, they just want to say, okay, democracy. So they see the democracy in Belgium, I mean, it's example, or in Iceland, and they want to do the same thing in Afghanistan. You can't do that. Again, that approach is completely wrong, because their approach is based on individuals who studied the cases there. So if I do not, it's really very complicated to explain, because the guy that they're relying their opinion on is either a guy from Afghanistan who immigrated in the EU 25 years ago, where he has absolutely no idea what is happening today on the ground, or either from someone from Iceland who just read books about Afghanistan and he's never been there. And that's the same thing that happens even as a general, as a policy, even in embassies, when they do want to want an embassy, you want to have an opinion about a specific case happening in Serbia or happening in Macedonia or everywhere, from where they can get information. So we do not have a reliable, we talk about Macedonia, we do not have a reliable, unbiased website or news in English where I can get the information. So they do get the information through other people who are affiliated with some political parties, so again the same thing. And that's why the approach is always wrong. In order to build a specific approach, when we work a governmental reform, we need to study the as-is, to think about how they want it to look like. So that's why the first question was the last question. About how people are being moved or transported. Unfortunately, I do not have enough information about that, but what I do know that this happens constantly, and they are moving from one country and they are appearing in another country. And if we look at it from, if you analyze that with the numbers that we have, I think we can figure out how. There are some countries, third countries, not involved directly in those conflicts, who have the logistics that they are facilitating the movement of any groups from any destination to any destination to create or to achieve their own personal agendas. The third one, it was about the number of refugees that we are expecting. Because last year, in 2020, in March, I gave a statement on the TV, and they asked me about the refugees from Syria that are coming, and I said this live on air. I said, no, the refugees that they are coming, they are not from Syria. They're coming from Bangladesh, they're coming from Afghanistan, they're coming from this and this and this. We knew about that. We was expecting that. About the numbers, unfortunately, I really cannot figure out the number. Back then, we were talking about 20,000, 30,000 last year. But now it is hard a bit to figure out that number, because if the EU develops legal instruments for them, well, I would suggest that they can send airplanes, they can take them from the airplanes and get them directly to their countries without the need of having another new Balkan route where we have to pass walking, because they get also exposed to local organized crimes, smuggling refugees, making money out of that, charging them 500 euros per person in order to pass them from Greece to Macedonia to Serbia, etc. So that was important.
Belarus.
I do not have enough information to comment on that.
What kind of route?
Well, it's airport. That's the same thing that I mentioned when I said they disappeared from Libya and they appeared in Afghanistan. It was planned, the airport again, I do not like to point finger to anyone. However, the only way they can reach is by airplane. So if you see who was controlling the airport, then I think we can figure out who assisted them In Belarus case, I really don't know. I cannot point the finger at any. But however, I know about the Middle East and how they moved from Libya to the airport, because even the Taliban, they are rejecting them. So they imposed, because the first flag it was to put them both in conflict with other two. Just some water.
We have a question from the audience, and I think one from Zoom.
Thank you very much. Rabi W, Institute of European Studies. It was a great pleasure to hear today. I have a brief observation and one question. As you know, of course I don't know, does all other people in the audience know it, Lebanon has, my question is about Lebanon, about your country. Lebanon has one specific political system which we can call confessionalism, established in 1926 and with amendments in 1989. Briefly, we have a strong political division by religious group. President has to be Maronite, Prime Minister Sunni, Speaker of the Parliament has to be Shia, and I think Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy of Speaker of the Parliament has to be Eastern Orthodox. So that system was established when I think Christians used to be majority in Lebanon. Today the situation is completely different. I mean, we have 30% of Sunni, around 30% of Shia, and it's 60% of Muslims, and they are majority now, and we have around 33% of Christians, Maronites, and all others together. So my question is, can we expect some changes of that system? Can we expect that Sunni and Shia Muslims start some kind of cooperation and start converting Lebanon in clearly Muslim country? I mean, I came from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I know very well how complex situation is that, and we have a Muslim majority in Bosnia now, more than 50% of them, and claiming that they should convert Bosnia in their own country. And that's my question. Thank you very much once again.
Yeah, you're welcome. So it's a bit complicated in Lebanon. First of all, when this system was invented, when it was developed, back then, that's the thing that most of the media, they ignore and they do not talk about it. It was the power of the president, who is Maronite, that those powers were removed by Al-Taif agreement in 1991 in Saudi Arabia. So in order to, so the powers that the president had, those were the ones that holding all the system together. Once they removed those powers and they gave it to the prime minister in Lebanon, then it went out of control. In order to fix that, the Taif agreement need to be reconsidered or need to be cancelled. So the powers gets them again, the president of the republic, so then we can fix those issues. And because of that, we have this problem in Lebanon from 91, from the liberation war, it was called, until today, and it cannot be fixed. So Lebanon is looking at three scenarios. This might upset some people, even here, who are listening. We have in Lebanon a party, which is Hezbollah, which this party is considered by Arabic countries that it's a terrorist organization. And here we have a problem, because some European countries, they have sympathy with Hezbollah. And that's the same very thing happened. I don't remember when it was the conflict between Israel and Gaza, the last one. Back then I was called on the radio to give a comment about that, and then I was on TV trying to explain to people that in Israel, they live there Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And in the West Bank, they live Christian, Muslims, and Jews, but not the Jews in the settlement. There are Jews that they live there. So the Arabs, Muslims that are in Israel, they do not want to leave Israel. And the Jews that are living in the West Bank, they do not want to leave the West Bank. So in Macedonia, when I went to comment on that, I saw that in the street. When you expected the first thing when you hear that, you see that you will say, yeah, the Christians, they will have sympathy with Israel, and the Muslims, they will have sympathy normally with the Muslims. But then you see that the Albanians in Macedonia, they were supporting Israel and giving the right to Israel to defend itself against the attacks, while the Christians, the Orthodox, the Pravoslav, they were going in the street protesting against Israel for Gaza. And that's the thing that I cannot understand. Because it seems more logical, the opposite. But I saw that. And then we come to, again, we connect this to what we was explaining, especially about the US. You know, the game of politics is a game, it's like a card game. The guy who wins will has his card, covered till the end of the game. And the one who are fighting today, they might be best friends tomorrow. So, and if we will wait for a sign to understand, we could wait 50 years. So, what I wanted to say that the thing in Lebanon, we have three scenarios. Hezbollah, either it will continue to be part of the government. If it continue to be part of the government, it will be seen, because Iran, when Iran says that I do not, every time they discuss, I'm sorry, all these things are connected. When every time there is a conference, there is a summit, there is a statement, anything regarding Iran, the nuclear program of Iran, they talk about everything with the West, except nobody in the West asks Iran, what about your interference in other countries? Nobody raises this question. Nobody. While we know that Iran controls parts of Syria, Lebanon, some parts of Iraq, so everybody's or ignoring or afraid to raise this question. So Hezbollah is under Iran's influence in Lebanon. So either Hezbollah not to be included in the next government, and this will not happen, because if this happened, it means same like in May 2008 when they took over the entire government with their militias. But however, Hezbollah is seen by other countries in the Middle East, or Muslim countries, they see it as a terrorist group.
Except Syria.
Except Syria, of course. But I'm talking about the other countries, because Syria did not have an active role in the past, let's say, 7 or 8 years in the policy making in the Middle East, because they had their own problems and their own issues. The second scenario, it's this what is happening now. It's a total chaos, because after the explosion last year, the economy, the thing was the COVID, plus Lebanon has its own problems. Because you know that there are 60 million Lebanese outside of Lebanon, they're living in Lebanon just 4.5 or 5 million Lebanese. Those people who are living in Lebanon, 70% are working in Arab countries, gray economy, sending money back to Lebanon, not paying tax, registered as unemployed, and that's a total collapse for the government, for the national institutions in Lebanon. Where you have the private sector is growing, all the money is outside. Today, the Lebanese cannot withdraw 100 euros from his card through an ATM machine. So I'm looking at three scenarios. Either it's Hezbollah to be included in the government, and if it is included in the government, that means more sanctions, that means more isolation. The second thing, not to be included in the government, but if it's not included in the government, it will have a very big and very repercussions. Entire agreement, national act, which was the first idea of creating such system, etc. And the third thing is a war, a civil war again. But the civil war again, it will not be between Lebanese, because the Lebanese, they will leave Lebanon. It will be with the militias that it's a proxy war. We all know that, as it was also in time. Thank you.
Thank you, and there is a question from Zoom.
Ms. Stana Dubajic has a question for Mr. Sédrak. So the question is, what is the likelihood that the part of the plan to reactivate ISIS Al-Qaeda sleeper cells in Kosovo and Bosnia and reunite the conflict there? Considering that this is the last theater in this part of the world where NATO, US and the EU interests directly clash with those of Russia and China, and that Kosovo has the highest per capita number of ISIS fighters. Also, what role do you think that SCO will be playing in counter-terrorism efforts and preventing the spillover to their member countries?
Okay. Well, I think I will say something that, when we talk, especially in this area of counter-terrorism, there is always a difference between the Muslim living in the Middle East, the Muslim living in Europe, the Muslim living in Africa. It's completely different. It is very easy to recruit Stevan to be part of an ISIS group rather than recruiting a moderate Muslim to be part of a terrorist group. Why? Because the Muslim, he knows about Islam, but Stevan, he doesn't know about Islam, so I can manipulate him. I think you can't right now. However, one of the things that we learn, and it is really, from a different point of view, we appreciate that we do not have a high terrorist threats coming from the Balkans, although a big percentage of the foreign fighters are from the Balkans. Why? Because most of the foreign fighters that are coming from the Balkans, they are cousins, nephews, nieces, family members from the same village, from the same. So, my personal opinion, and based on studies and analysis, first, there are no threats to the region of let's say, terrorist attacks, because, first of all, we have the Muslim population in the region. Second of all, they are all coming from the same ethnic group, and they do have a code which is completely different than the Muslims in the Middle East. The Muslim in the region, he was born and he saw a church, and he saw that there are Christian living, he saw that there are other religions around, but however, the one that he was born in Afghanistan, he did not see anything else. So it is quite impossible, and it never happened, that anyone from the Balkans that did something, or he represented a threat to the safety of the people in the Balkans. The thing that most of them, they are coming from here, I will now surprise you more with things that I shared at the last conference with it. The number of the foreign fighters, Christians participating in the Middle East, currently is higher than the number of the Muslims participating in the Middle East.
Kurds?
No, I'm talking about the foreign fighters, FTF, foreign terrorist fighters. They are mercenaries.
Fighting for the Kurdish side.
But I do not say fighting, I'm saying they're coming from the region, whoever, they're fighting for money, they're not fighting for an ideology or for a religion. And then you get shocked when they see, no, I'm not shocked. People then will tell you, but they're Christians, yeah, but they're doing this for money. Because unemployment, yeah. Maybe their countries, they just put them in retirement, whatever, and who doesn't have other professions. So, and the second thing, which is also it's worth to mention, that everyone, most of them, of the FTF living from the Balkan, it was not on a recruitment basis, it was on a voluntary basis. So they chose to go there. Nobody forced them, nobody recruited them.
But if I got the question correct, it was about the usage of these fighters in the Balkans by the third party, meaning NATO, US. the possibility that they can be used as proxies the same way that happened in Syria or Afghanistan?
Well, I just answered that, because if they are mercenaries, then they can be used by the second, the third, the fourth, and the first party. Besides what I mentioned about the relation between organized crime groups, OCG, and terrorist groups, they live in symbiosis. The organized crime groups in the Balkans, they cannot live without the help of the terrorists. When I say terrorists, I do not mean the terrorists who are wearing the clothes that we see from Qaeda and Taliban. I'm talking about terrorists who with background tactics and a lot of things, and that's why they live together, they help each other, and so they secure the work of the organized crime groups, while organized crime groups, they facilitate the movement of the terrorists out and inside Europe and the Balkans. So the possibility is not only by one entity, it's by every entity, because EU can hire some of them. So I hope I answered the question.
If there aren't any more questions, I would like to thank. Sorry?
No, I thought you want to start the debate.
Oh, no, later on. Yes, because we will bore people and debates will last for hours as they usually do. So I would like to thank our guest with a round of applause.
No, Miss Stan Dubaic has responded, and she said that the second part of her question wasn't answered. So the question, the second part, yes.
I do not, unfortunately, have enough information to answer the second part of the question. I'm not informed, and I cannot give a well-informed answer.
Thank you, and see you perhaps another time, Belgrade, as well as our guest.
Thank you very much.